This is a tough weekend for me because a memory that has lived with me for the last 10 years is stuck in my head constantly on a almost daily basis when it comes to wrestling. And anytime you think about wrestling, it's one of those things that it doesn't go away. I know I don't make videos much on here, so maybe most people that were around at the time are not here to watch this, or most of the people that even give a shit about what I have to say don't even care. Most of us shooters on here aren't even here anymore, or at least we do not use this platform anymore to express our opinions on wrestling. For me, it's Facebook, and even then, I only post like here and there. I still watch the business. I still go to WrestleManias and all that, because wrestling is instilled within me. It's going to be hard to kind of find the right terminology for certain things because I'm here to encounter everything that I went through 10 years ago when I found out about the Chris Benoit tragedy. And I want everybody to, I'm going to try and paint a picture as well as I can, because some people probably weren't there, probably weren't watching, probably didn't know of this video, because it's not up anymore. The videos that I had at that time are not up. And maybe that's for the best, because those would be videos that'd be hard for me to watch. So, yeah. I remember when I was younger, when I had heard about a company called WCW. There were two guys that had always caught my eye in that company. Diamond Dallas Page and Chris Benoit. Those were the two guys that just, there was something about those two that were unique, that were cool, that were awesome. And both of them did make their way to the WWF later on. Benoit would be in 2000 when he was with the Radicals, and DDP was in mid 2001 where he did that storyline angle with The Undertaker, which I didn't think started off bad, because DDP did an excellent job, but it went bad. But anyways, I knew there was something about Chris Benoit, and then later on I would know the same thing with Eddie Guerrero. There was just something about those two that were just exceptional talents. One of my biggest regrets, because from 2001 till about 2010, I had never been to a wrestling event. I had gone when I was younger, but I barely went to wrestling events at that point because my parents, who also watched it, go figure, watching the Attitude Era, they just kind of stopped watching because it just wasn't entertaining for them anymore. And so one of the events that had happened in between this gap was WrestleMania 20. And I would have loved to have been there for Benoit and Eddie because it was in the Garden. I'm in New Jersey. The Garden is just a bus ride there. A bus ride and a train ride there. I can get there pretty quickly. And I never got to go see Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero win the titles. That was a significant time because, well, Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart kind of were the ones that gave you the idea that, yes, smaller guys could win the title. They still were about 6'1", 220 or whatever. Now you're talking about Eddie Guerrero and Benoit, who are like 5'10", 5'8". These guys can win the world title. So they were kind of evolving into that point where now anybody can win the world title. It doesn't matter size. But not only that, Chris Benoit, his gimmick wasn't a gimmick. It was the Rabid Wolverine. He was just a guy that was going to go in there and whip some ass. So when he won the world title, it was a special moment. It's still a special moment with me to this day, even after the circumstances, because I'll get into that. So Eddie Guerrero died a year after that, a year and a half after that. And people have said that Chris Benoit had kind of like changed I don't know the guy personally, never got to know the guy personally. So that was hard. That was hard on the wrestling industry because everybody took Eddie Guerrero's death as like one of the few good souls in the business, similar to that of an Owen Hart. But then a year and a half after that, Chris Benoit dies. Now let me set up the circumstances. That weekend there was a pay-per-view going on. It was going to be Vengeance 2007. Chris Benoit was due to face CM Punk for the ECW title. That's a dream match, especially at that time. That was a big dream match. CM Punk and Chris Benoit is for the ECW title. That's gonna be kick ass. That's gonna be some good shit. Well, I remember I used to go to my friend John's house for pay-per-views, and I still do to this day, theoretically, because he's got the network now, so now they're cheaper. So go figure. Anybody who knows John. So I remember leading up into that weekend, there was rumor that Chris Benoit may not make it to the show. And it had something to do with his wife being sick. There was that Wikipedia page incident, but I didn't really get my information from Wikipedia. I just remember hearing from like lordsofpain.net or something like that Chris Benoit probably will not make it to the show. So the day of the show, I go to John's house, watch the pay-per-view, and sure enough, they announced that Chris Benoit was not going to be there. Or they didn't necessarily say that. They just said in replacement for Chris Benoit, it was going to be Johnny Nitro. But I didn't think much of it. I just thought, he didn't make it. Something happened. So next day rolls around. I, at this time, was unemployed. I had, see my thick-ass mustache, it was like much lighter. It looked like, it really looked like a peach fuzz, as one would say. I didn't have money. I didn't have a job. I didn't have any sort of hobby to do. So I just sat around on the computer and looked up wrestling or video games or whatever that I like. Just doing what it is that I like to do. And at around 3 o'clock, I don't know if it was like 2 or 3 o'clock, I get a message. And it's from a YouTube user by the name of Holy Day, who went by Innovator Science later on and then just disappeared. He messaged me on AIM, and he said that Chris Benoit was dead. And when somebody sends me something like that, I'm not going to just take it at face value. Like something that serious, I'm going to research it, make sure that it's the truth, because I don't want to get all emotional and then somebody just fucking pranked me. So what do? You go to the main source, www.com. And sure enough, on their main the main page, it said Chris Benoit found dead. Whew. Now, at this time, YouTube shooting was a brand new thing. A bunch of us, there wasn't a lot of us back then. There was like, I don't even want to say a clique, because not all of us really talked to each other every day. But we knew of each other. So we all got into a Skype call. It was like a big Skype call, and we all like just grieved over the death. And I know a lot of people in that call. Again, we didn't know each other, but we kind of knew each other a little bit more after this incident. It was very weird how all of us could just get into a Skype call and grieve, and even, I mean, some of them weren't there, like the bigger names. The big names at that time were Bill and Doug of RED Tito for Life and Wrestle Guru. But the rest of us were on a Skype call. We were just like, some of them were in tears. It was a weird situation. But I remember the Raw came on, and I said, I want to watch this by myself. So I left the call, watched the Raw. I know somewhere in the way, a friend of mine, Chris, called me, and he said, did you hear about Chris Benoit? My response is, if it involves wrestling, I probably knew hours before you did, because he likes wrestling, but he's not as hardcore into it as I am. Like I'm into like everything. And so I then called my friend Anthony, who was at a graduation, to tell him that. I shouldn't have done that, because it may have ruined his day, because he was a big Chris Benoit fan. And so after the show, that's when we found out that Chris Benoit killed his wife, killed his kid, killed himself. Now, at the time that we found out that, I did forget to mention that note, and I feel bad for forgetting to mention it, but his wife and his kid were also found dead. And that was the other thing we were talking about in the Skype call. We were like, is this carbon monoxide poisoning? We were not even close to thinking about a double murder-suicide. We're thinking like any other possibility but that. But yeah, he was found dead of an apparent double murder-suicide. At that point, the very next day, I visited Chris, and we just talked about it, and people on the bus were talking about Chris Benoit. It was absolutely crazy that this was becoming bigger than just another wrestling story that only wrestling fans could even talk about. But it blew up from there. A lot of people who were not fans, who had heard about this story, started putting their input, like, oh, how did you be a fan of a killer? What nobody understood at that time was, first off, we were going through a grieving process of losing a wrestler that we all highly respected. And then to lose him in this manner, of course, we're going to be very defensive. People have their own input of how they would take the Chris Benoit double murder-suicide. Should we still celebrate him as the best wrestler ever? Should he be in the Hall of Fame? All this stuff and this, that, and the other. I can still watch Chris Benoit matches to this day. Just recently, I watched him and Kurt Angle versus Edge and Rey Mysterio, No Mercy 2002. I can still watch a Chris Benoit match and be entertained. My girlfriend, I can show her Chris Benoit matches without a problem. I showed her Benoit and Angle from Royal Rumble 03. I showed her Benoit, Michaels, and Hunter from WrestleMania 20. I can show matches of Chris Benoit. I'm not one of those guys that says I've never watched a Chris Benoit match since. Oh, I can't watch a Chris Benoit match. Oh, Super J Cup, I had watched that a few years ago. I'm not one of those guys that's going to allow this to prevent my enjoyment, and maybe that sounds morbid. Take it for what you will. There's been a lot of debate over this. Should Chris Benoit be respected? Should he? Some people can't separate the person from the wrestler, even 10 years after the fact. Some people still say he was a cold-blooded murderer, even though there's probably experts that would say that he probably can't be blamed because of the condition of his brain. But then you're going to have the people that said, oh, well, he signed up to do this. But again, it's the same thing with football, and how many people have suffered concussions over the years, and we didn't know how serious concussions can really be. This is shit we didn't know. We didn't have any knowledge of. You can't blame somebody over something that we had absolutely zero knowledge of and was not warned about prior. But what I will say is that I do believe you can't erase Chris Benoit from history. It's impossible. It's not like he was just some fly-by-night jobber that did a couple jobs here and there, and then he just withered away, and then he did this, or he, you know what I'm saying? Like somebody that didn't really amount to much. Like, okay, I'll give you an example of a wrestler, Ahmed Johnson. He was very popular at the time. He even won the Intercontinental title, but he was only in the company for like 3 years. Went to WCW as Big T, and then didn't really do much there, and that was it. If you wanted to erase him from history, which by all accounts they have done, they barely really bring him up in anything. You can theoretically do that because he didn't really leave much of a foot. Well, he left one footnote. First, I guess, African American champion. That's really it. But he didn't really do much other than that. Chris Benoit, on the other hand, he won world titles left and right. He was, again, one of the most well-renowned wrestlers. He main evented one of the biggest pay-per-views that you hold, and it was the 20th anniversary. You can't really erase somebody like that from history. You don't have to celebrate him if that's what you wish. Now, that brings up the other debate. Should he go into the Hall of Fame? There's always that big debate, and Chris Jericho says he doesn't see it happening. I don't personally see it happening, because in order for that to happen, there has to be a resurgence in society that says, okay, murder's wrong, but this guy had brain damage. Some people just can't separate that, because, again, he did kill a child. Nobody's ever going to be able to, in my opinion, as time goes on, even further down the line, nobody's going to be able to separate the fact that he killed his kid, no matter what excuse you give. Even if it's a legitimate excuse, there's no way. It's impossible to convince people to induct him in the Hall of Fame when he had just killed a child. I don't see him ever getting inducted in the Hall of Fame. 10 years after the fact, they don't mention him all that much. The only time Benoit is even brought up is on the network, and he's not even brought up per se. It's just old shows that he's on that they've decided to keep in, and the encyclopedia that they release. He'll be in that. But I think it only goes as far as to his WrestleMania win, WrestleMania 20. So to this day, they don't really mention him on TV. They don't bring him up at all. They don't bring anything of Chris Benoit related into their video packages, whether it be Money in the Bank that he participated in, Elimination Chamber, WrestleMania moments, Royal Rumble moments when he won the Royal Rumble. They never bring that up to this day. And I don't know, do you bring that up? I mean, people say it was the worst thing that could have happened to the WWE. I highly disagree with that. I think the steroid scandal in the early 90s was worse, because the shit that happened in the early 90s could have gotten Vince McMahon jail time, and who knows what would have happened to the WWF if Vince McMahon would have been found guilty. That shit that happened in the early 90s, and then the rape charges, Pat Patterson, yeah, that shit would have gotten WWE even worse shit than this did. But I'll just say, for all intents and purposes, after 10 years, maybe inducting him into the Hall of Fame just isn't the way to go, especially now. But I do feel, this is just me, there can be an incentive to mention him. There could be an incentive to say, okay, yes, he was on our roster. He did this. He was a very talented wrestler, but we just cannot, for all intents and purposes, make money off of him. I would have said make a documentary about the whole thing if WWE's comfortable with it. I highly doubt they ever will be. And maybe it would be in bad taste. But who knows? I mean, I would figure that making something for Chris Benoit would be very good for young athletes who want to get into the business, to know that not to do what Chris Benoit did, not to follow his suit, not to constantly bump your head all the time, because this may happen to you. Or in even less extremes, wrestlers and football players that kill themselves after getting brain damage, such as Junior Seau, Chris Kanyon, guys like that. Jovan Belker. So try to understand the consequences of constantly doing or hurting your head every single night. So I think it would be a good learning experience for talent. However, I don't think that they'll ever do that. But I do feel that after 10 years, it still runs in my mind, the Chris Benoit thing. And it's especially going to run through my mind this whole weekend. But I feel like I don't want to pretend he doesn't exist, or he never did exist, because that's just not logical in any way, shape, or form. He did exist. He put his footnote in this business. He evolved this business, if you will. But yeah, I firmly believe, and I said when I was younger, this was one of the things that I said. And I know we're comparing two completely different extremes. Trust me. I understand that. I remember saying when I was a kid, when that happened, if Hulk Hogan committed the same act, are you just going to erase him from history? Because Hogan, the biggest star of the business. Well, Hogan was found making racist remarks, and everybody's now saying you can't erase Hogan from history. Just saying. I know two different extremes we're talking about here, but how are you going to bring it? I mean, think about it theoretically. How are you going to bring a guy back, talk about a guy that murders his kid? How are you going to bring a guy back from constantly making racist remarks? Especially in a day and age where we're politically correct. Anyways, I just want to say that I still will always remember Chris Benoit as one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. He was probably the most unique talent WWE ever pushed, because he just wasn't a full life character like everybody else. And it's unfortunate that what happened, because he'll never be remembered for all the great shit that he did. And I can just imagine how the families of both the Benoits and Nancy's families are going through. I can just imagine it right now. I can just imagine what anybody who is close to either of those people are going through at this moment. That's all I've got to say. That was my experience through the Benoit stuff, and just hopefully in the next few years, maybe we can start teaching people about Chris Benoit a little bit more. Maybe not celebrating him, but realizing that you can still become a big name in the business without having to have a crazy out of whack character just become true, just become real. You know what I'm saying? So that's all I really got to say. So hopefully you enjoyed this long video, and maybe tell us where you were when Chris Benoit, well, when it was revealed that Chris Benoit was dead, and then they revealed, where were you, and how did you react to the whole thing? That's all I gotta say. Take care.